Hello, welcome to Opera Insight 2024 Segment 2. I'm your presenter, Don Feinberg, and let's jump in. This season, we're looking for the recipe for love. You know, when you're trying to find a successful recipe, the right ingredients depend on what you want as the outcome. And love comes in many varieties. John Allen Lee created probably the most cited psychological understanding of love. He organized love into different types and subtypes. Prominent among them is ludic love, where love is a game played more for sex or diversion than relational or even physical satisfaction. Ludic lovers don't hesitate to manipulate and seduce for their own gratification, often sequentially and simultaneously. And in the world of opera, one more than any other epitomizes ludic love. This season's second production, Mozart's Don Giovanni. Psychologically, the opera teaches us as much about what true love is not as about what true love really is. Nevertheless, many people count this opera among their favorites. Some have proclaimed it the greatest opera ever. Søren Kierkegaard, the famous Danish philosopher, described the opera as having a great and unsettling power. Our director, Stephen Barlow, who's directed many operas by Mozart, calls this opera, Don Giovanni, Mozart's masterpiece. Even after 23 years, when he first directed a production of Don Giovanni, he says that this opera indeed has gifts that he's still discovering. So, what are these gifts? What makes this opera have persistent popularity, especially since the main character is such a cad? I believe that this year's production provides an answer. This opera inspires creative interpretation. The power of Mozart's music combined with Da Ponte's brilliant libretto punctuates drama with comedic moments. While many may disagree that this is the greatest opera ever, I think we all can agree that the sublime mixture of serious drama and comedy make Don Giovanni one of the masterworks of the opera canon. Librettist Lorenzo da Ponte labeled the opera drama giocoso, a joking drama that integrates tragedy and comedy. And we experience this integration right from the overture. It begins with somber chords in a serious minor key. For you music mavens out there, it's the key of D minor. But for the rest of us, it just sets a tone of eerie drama. As we will hear later, it is the theme of the murdered commendatore who comes back to life and Giovanni's guilty conscience. More on this later. Back to the overture. Before it concludes, the key changes into a snappy D major worthy of any comic opera. Although this upbeat music doesn't actually appear thematically in the opera, it succeeds in creating the balance of a powerful opposite in this drama giocoso. From those opening musical moments, the opera holds us in its thrall. This is the reason that this opera has thrived where so many other attempts to tell the story of Don Juan have been relegated to the proverbial dustbin of history. You know, as a story of revenge, the narrative is not that interesting. In the opera's first act, Don Giovanni, a sex addict and seducer of women, kills the father of a woman he's attempted to rape, Donna Anna. Haunted by the killing much more than any remorse about his sexcapades, the darkness of his soul catches up to him, and he literally invites his own death in the end. You know, as a morality play, opera goers today, and likely opera goers in Mozart's day as well, don't put much stock in avenging ghosts coming back to life as statues who drag their murderers down to hell. Yes, I left that part out. In traditional productions, there's a statue of the murdered father. By the way, he's not even named in the opera. He's just called the commendatore. He does come back to life, and he grabs the brazen Don Giovanni and sends him to hell. Now, between these two bookends, the murder and the climactic death of Don Giovanni, there's an action-packed drama giocoso informed by extremely memorable musical score. The highlights go something like this. Don Giovanni lingers after a masked ball thrown by Donna Anna. This leaves his servant Leporello outside complaining about his lot in life. But he knows full well what his master is up to. We learn Giovanni's seduction has gone awry, and with the screams of Donna Anna insisting the man tried to force himself on her, she insists he unmask and identify himself. Now, I've seen many productions of this opera. Overwhelmingly, interpretations depict Donna Anna as having an erotic and passionate encounter with a masked stranger and threatens to scream only if he won't reveal his identity. Not our Donna Anna. She screams to unmask the man who attempted to rape her and who she has successfully fended off. And by now, you probably realized this is no old-timey traditional Don Giovanni, for no better reason than the set and costumes, which suggest 19th century London and not 18th century Seville. But this choice is not random, as we shall soon see. Back to the narrative. Her father, the commendatore, comes out and insists on fighting Don Giovanni, weapon in hand. Donna Anna runs for help. Don Giovanni has had enough of this family, and at first he just refuses to fight, but he does defend himself and fatally wounds the commendatore. As he's dying, the moving music suggests how much Don Giovanni is truly unsettled as the soul of the commendatore leaves his body. Don Giovanni is psychologically haunted from that moment forward. Decades of getting away with being a carefree libertine, he cannot deal with becoming a murderer. He is shaken to the core. No matter how hard he tries to squash his guilt with sexual distraction, he fails. This dark splotch of guilt on his soul cannot be overcome. Ultimately, when he cannot kill off his conscience, he ends his agony by doing himself in. Yes, he tries to eradicate his own darkened soul that appears to him as the face of the commendatore in his very own portrait. This supernatural element is implied in the eerie D minor that occurs in the opera, not with walking statues, but rather with the projection of Don Giovanni's own mind. Now, wait a minute, this doesn't really sound like Don Giovanni. Wait, but haven't we seen it before? Perhaps in another context. Story may seem vaguely familiar. A seducer, an abandoner of women, committing murder, darkening his soul, ultimately doing himself in. Think of another character with the initials DG. Don Giovanni shares them with this other title character. In the character setting, not Spain. Think instead of the class-conscious society of 19th century London, where this second title character lives, where he keeps a portrait of himself that turns uglier and uglier as his soul darkens, but maintains facade of the handsome and debonair aristocrat. And I think by now you've guessed who this latter DG is. He's Dorian Gray in The Story by Oscar Wilde. He's the one with the portrait that depicts growing evil in his soul that ultimately overwhelms him. The two stories of these two DGs are remarkably similar. They have the same initials, and Stephen Barlow, the director, found the parallels irresistible. He decided to take that ball and run with it. So, how does Don Giovanni attempt to compensate for his unsettling guilt? He goes with what he knows, ludic love. He tries to distract himself with sexual exploitation of women, yet he fails to quell the guilt that now grows inside him. From that moment on, his life begins to unravel. Now, initially, it's hardly noticeable, but inevitably, it leads to his doom. Like Don Giovanni at first, we hardly notice the powerful seeds of his undoing. But now, we've arrived at that juncture that shows us what makes this opera so magnificent. It is the ultimate drama giocoso, a tragedy paced by its comedy. Immediately after the moving music that accompanies Don Giovanni as he attends the commendatore with his soul leaving his body, Leporello breaks the tension with a line that always gets a laugh. Who's dead, you or the old man? Giovanni chides him for his stupidity and then shakes off his initial remorse by rationalizing, oh, he was asking for it. but Leporello counters like his daughter was asking to be raped. They exit. This first exit is the easiest, but they get harder and harder until he can no longer escape. Let's see how this unfolds. Donna Anya shows up with Don Ottavio, her fiancé, eager to help her father. They find him dead. The scene is musically accompanied by a recitative that has its harsh orchestral strings of horror and woodwinds of grief expressing their emotion. This leads to a solemn oath of vengeance, and the serious mood is restored. Immediately, the scene shifts to more comedy. Leporello has something to tell his master and extracts a promise that Giovanni won't get angry. He accuses Don Giovanni of living the life of a scoundrel. Of course, with perfect timing, Giovanni breaks his promise and explodes in rage. The situation resolves as Giovanni describes an intended conquest later that day, but their conversation is actually interrupted by the arrival of yet another woman. Don Giovanni senses what he calls the scent of a woman. His drive for sexual distraction has taken on an animalistic aspect of a predatory beast, and this new arrival apparently presents an opportunity. The woman is Donna Elvira. She is lamenting abandonment by a lover. She's vowed to get him to return. This serious aria is balanced by Giovanni seeing his chance, as he says, to console her, as Leporello comments as an aside, yes, like 1,800 others. Well, as the catalog aria a few minutes later will document, the number is actually 2,065. But in any case, a brief trio unfolds, and in this trio, she recognizes him and laments that he came into her house, seduced her, married her, and stayed only 3 days and then abandoned her. By way of explanation, he instructs Leporello, you explain it to her, and he escapes. Escape number 2, a little hassle, but not much problem. Leporello's explanation is his famous light-hearted catalog aria, the countries of his conquests, his types, which turn out to be every type of woman, all shapes, sizes, ages, hair color, experienced or not, pretty or not, rich or not, all women. And then Leporello slips away. Next, we meet a working-class couple, Misetto and his bride-to-be, Zerlina. Zerlina is flirtatious. She advises the chorus of friends, don't trifle with love and let time pass you by. She's taken with Don Giovanni. This infuriates Misetto. Her jealous fiancé is not fooled by Giovanni's offer for protection, which he understands in reality is a seduction, but he won't confront the aristocrat. He calls Zerlina's names like, you little witch, you evildoer, and departs with Leporello. Don Giovanni woos Zerlina with flattery and a promise to wed her and, of course, bed her that very afternoon. This melody is so delightful, first with the flute and then with the bassoon, that we are as seduced as Zerlina. But Donna Elvira interrupts the seduction and rescues the confused Zerlina. Donna Anya and Don Ottavio enter and ask Giovanni for his help in their search for the murderer. Don Elvira returns again and accuses Don Giovanni of being her abandoner. At first, Giovanni says, oh, she's crazy. And as the intensity of the accusations increase, the level of discomfort increases. After Donna Elvira withdraws, Don Giovanni orders Leporello to do the explaining and then awkwardly makes his excuses and leaves. You see, this escape number 3 is more problematic. And with Donna Elvira on the scene, the situation is heating up. At that point, Donna Anna correctly recognizes Don Giovanni as the rapist and the murderer. She renews her cry for vendetta. She leaves. Don Ottavio, in his own love aria, wonders if these accusations can be true. He loves her and sings of only wanting her to be happy. This desire for your beloved to be happy is actually another category of love for our recipe, agape, or selfless love. However, when he then moves on to wanting his engagement to turn into a marriage and get back something for his love, he moves into the third category, or eros, or reciprocal romantic physical love. This includes the flirtatious, passionate, and reciprocated love desired by Zerlina with Don Giovanni, and which she ultimately finds with Mazzetto. Now, the opera is certainly adding different flavors to our recipe for love. Ludic love, that's Don Giovanni. Agape is selfless love, Ottavio only wanting Donna Anna to be happy. And finally, Eros, the love which in this classification implies reciprocity and mutuality. We get a glimpse of the latter two, but when it comes to the opera Don Giovanni, it is ludic scene after scene. Next, we find Don Giovanni in another comic exchange with Leporello, this time about how he managed Donna Elvira. Giovanni's aria described his plan to throw in an engagement party for Zerlina and have sex with at least 10 of the working class girls before the night is through. His addiction to sex to soothe him has intensified because he understands things have not gone his way. He thinks the devil's behind his undoing. But why is it so different than his first 2,000 seductions? We know the reason, because now he has killed somebody. The scene shifts to the party. Giovanni calms the upset Mazzetto and Zerlina, and they get on to the party. Giovanni notices the trio of accusers skulking around. He tells Leporello, invite them in. Giovanni goes off with Zerlina. Things heat up fast. Zerlina screams. The trio unmasks. And now Ottavio draws his gun. And in a feeble attempt to confuse the situation, Giovanni blames Leporello. No one's buying it, but there's sufficient confusion for Giovanni and Leporello to make their escape. This time, under a dark, threatening cloud, an armed Don Ottavio. This is the problematic and a little bit dangerous escape number 4. After intermission, as we've now come to expect, Act 2 begins by pacing the opera with comic relief. Leporello is again threatening to quit, but it's convinced to stay with a few extra coins. And then Giovanni hatches another scheme. He wants to change clothes with Leporello. And then he wants Leporello, posing as Don Giovanni, to convince Donna Elvira that he is repentant. The two of them can go off, keeping Donna Elvira occupied. Once they go off, with Leporello enjoying the attentions of the beautiful Donna Elvira, Giovanni goes on to court Elvira's maid. True to the catalog aria, he seduces rich aristocrats like Donna Elvira, working class girls like Zerlina, and servants like the maid. But even she rejects his advances. He had thought fate was on his side at last, but now his senses that his curse continues. And then the confrontations become more deadly. An entire armed vigilante mob led by Mazzetto is out to kill him. This requires crafty misdirection. Aided by his being dressed up like Leporello, he pretends to help them. He fools the mob, and when he gets Mazzetto alone, he beats him. A more difficult and dangerous escape number 5. Now, in the comic relief that follows, there's a sextet with Leporello pretending to be Don Giovanni, Donna Elvira believing it to be him, an encounter with Don Ottavio and Donna Anna searching for him, joined by Zerlina and Mazzetto. Leporello then reveals it's him himself, Leporello. He pleads for mercy. Donna Elvira remains torn, wanting both vengeance on and reconciliation with this man, despite all she still loves. This is one of the strongest arias in the opera. In the following scene, the spirit of the commendatore confronts Don Giovanni. The spooky music lets you know we have re-entered the serious side of the story. And here's where it gets more interesting. In the traditional version of Donna Anna's dead father, who speaks and Don Giovanni instructs the frightened Leporello to invite him to dinner, in our production, we begin to see the serious projection of Don Giovanni's guilt. From a psychological point of view, there very well can be a moral division between the uncaring seducer of women rationalizing action as offering the women what they want, while simultaneously carry the heavy burden of guilt for having killed someone. When I was the psychiatry consultant to the State Penitentiary of New Mexico for 5 years, I met several rapists who had little remorse and who had rationalized their assaults much like Don Giovanni. And yet, they clearly believed that killing someone would be an unthinkable crime. This split moral reality exists in the real world of sexual predators, and it adds a layer of authenticity to the mythic story of Don Giovanni. Well, back to the narrative. The scene shifts again. Donna Anna refuses Don Ottavio's proposal to move their engagement on to marriage. One senses in the serious music, despite all their talk of vengeance, that her underlying grief is embedded in the structure of the piece. It would be little surprising that the finale begins with 5 minutes of comedic eating and drinking and music. You might recognize melodies from Mozart's Marriage of Figaro. Donna Elvira enters with her final plea for Don Giovanni. Her strong, serious vocal line is treated with sarcasm and disdain by him. And now we have the final confrontation with the spirit of the commendatore. This is where the eerie supernatural musical theme recurs, and Don Giovanni sees the commendatore as part of himself, as shown in his portrait, a serious nod to Dorian Gray. And when he goes to destroy the soul of the commendatore, he's destroying himself. In this production, the death of Don Giovanni is a very eerie and personal act of self-destruction. In the end, while Don Giovanni can elude the vindictive mobs and vengeful women, he cannot escape himself. True to the rhythm of this narrative, there's an epilogue of an almost comic sextet. All the major characters agree. Don Giovanni got what he deserved. And then they go back to their lives. Donna Anna still puts off Ottavio's marriage proposal. Donna Elvira has lost her lover, so she goes off to a nunnery. The reconciled Zerlina and Massetto head for their honeymoon, sexual bliss. And Leporello, who begins the whole opera with his lament of dissatisfaction with his life as a servant, is going to head off to town to find a new master. And finally, what about us? We have just experienced one of the world's greatest works of art, renowned opera, a sublime combination of tragedy and comedy. Obviously, our lives may not be a drama giocoso, but we can definitely relate to this opera's ups and downs. For us, it is a cathartic reflection of life, and in the end, it really isn't an opera about seduction, rape, murder, and revenge, but a tale of personal responsibility for choices we make and how we live our lives, and surely something worthwhile for all of us to consider. Next, we find ourselves in the 20th century with the world premiere opera, The Righteous. See you there.